The rain came down in sheets over downtown Chicago, turning the sidewalks into shimmering rivers of gray. Most people hurried past with umbrellas and coffee cups, eager to escape the cold October morning. No one noticed the little girl sitting beneath the old Franklin Street Bridge. She couldn't have been older than 9. Her oversized hoodie was torn at the sleeves, and her sneakers had holes so large her socks were soaked through. She hugged a battered backpack to her chest as if it contained everything she owned, because it did. Inside were 2 shirts, a faded photograph of her mother, and a worn notebook filled with dreams she'd written when she still believed dreams came true. Her name was Emily Carter. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. As another passerby ignored her, Emily whispered to herself the words her mother used to say. "Keep your heart kind, even when the world isn't." She repeated them every day. They were all she had left. Across the city, inside one of Chicago's tallest glass skyscrapers, Billionaire, Jonathan Harrison stared silently through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. At 63, Jonathan was one of America's most respected businessmen. He had built Harrison Technologies from a tiny garage, startup into a company worth billions. Business magazines called him brilliant. Investors called him a genius. Employees called him fair. But when Jonathan returned each night to his enormous mansion overlooking Lake Michigan, there was only silence, no laughter, no family dinners, no children running through the halls, only memories. 27 years earlier, his wife, Grace, and their unborn daughter had died in a tragic car accident. Jonathan never remarried. He buried himself in work, convincing himself success could replace happiness. It never did. That morning, Jonathan canceled 3 board meetings. His assistant looked shocked. "Sir, the investors are already here." Jonathan picked up his coat. "They'll survive." "Where are you going?" He smiled faintly. "For a walk." It was something Grace had always insisted they do together whenever life became overwhelming. "Sometimes," she'd tell him, "you have to leave the office to find what really matters." 40 minutes later, Jonathan wandered through downtown without security, without bodyguards, without anyone recognizing the billionaire walking beside them. He enjoyed those rare moments. People treated him like an ordinary man, until he heard a tiny voice. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned. Emily stood a few feet away. She looked terrified. "I'm sorry to bother you." Her stomach growled loudly before she could finish. Embarrassment flooded her face. Jonathan noticed immediately. "When was the last time you ate?" Emily looked at the ground. "I'm okay." He smiled gently. "That wasn't my question." She hesitated. "Yesterday." Jonathan felt something tighten inside his chest. "Yesterday. A child shouldn't know what hunger felt like. Come with me." Emily instantly stepped backward. "I don't steal." Jonathan blinked. "What?" "I know people think kids like me steal. I don't. I promise." His heart broke. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of being accused. He knelt until they were eye level. "I never thought that." "You didn't?" "No." She searched his face carefully. Children living on the streets learned quickly who could be trusted. Something about his eyes reminded her of her grandfather. Kind. Tired. Lonely. Finally, she nodded. They entered a small family diner nearby. The waitress smiled warmly. "What can I get you to?" Jonathan looked at Emily. "Anything you want?" Emily stared at the menu for almost a full minute. Not because she couldn't decide, because she couldn't believe she was allowed to choose. Quietly, she pointed. "Pancakes." The waitress smiled. "And?" Emily shook her head. "Just pancakes." Jonathan added gently. "And bacon. Eggs. Fresh fruit. Orange juice. And hot chocolate." Emily's eyes widened. "That's too much." "No." He smiled. "It's breakfast." When the food arrived, Emily froze. She simply stared. Jonathan noticed tears filling her eyes. "Is something wrong?" "I've never—" She stopped. "Never what?" "No one's ever bought me breakfast before." Jonathan looked away, pretending to study the window so she wouldn't see the tears gathering in his own eyes. She ate slowly at first, then faster. Finally, she apologized. I'm sorry. For what? I think I ate too much. Jonathan laughed softly. I've seen grown executives eat twice that much. For the first time, Emily laughed. It was a tiny laugh, but it transformed her entire face. Jonathan hadn't realized how beautiful Hope could look until that moment. After breakfast, he asked carefully, "Where are your parents?" Emily became quiet. My mom died. I'm sorry. My dad left before I was born. Jonathan nodded. And relatives? She looked down. My aunt said she couldn't afford another mouth to feed. So she... Emily forced a smile. It's okay. No, Jonathan thought. It's not okay. Outside the diner, Jonathan noticed Emily shivering. Without saying a word, he removed his expensive wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It's warm. I know. You'll freeze. What about you? I'll survive. She held the coat tightly. No one's ever shared their coat with me. Jonathan smiled sadly. No one? She shook her head. As they walked together, Emily suddenly stopped near a flower stand. Jonathan noticed her staring at a bouquet of white lilies. My mom loved those. He asked. Would you like one? She smiled sadly. I don't have anywhere to put flowers. Then she quietly added, but thank you for asking. Before Jonathan could respond, a police officer approached. There you are. Emily immediately panicked. I didn't do anything. The officer sighed. No, sweetheart. We've just been looking for you. Jonathan stepped forward. Is there a problem? The officer recognized him instantly. Mr. Harrison. Jonathan nodded. The officer explained quietly. This little girl has been sleeping near the bridge for weeks. We've tried placing her in emergency shelters. She keeps running away. Jonathan looked at Emily. Why? She whispered. They separate kids. My best friend Tommy is 7. If I leave, he'll be alone. Jonathan looked around. Where is Tommy? Emily pointed toward the bridge. A tiny boy peeked from behind a concrete pillar. He looked frightened. Jonathan crouched beside him. Hi. The little boy didn't answer. Emily smiled. He doesn't talk much. Jonathan reached into his pocket and handed Tommy a chocolate bar he'd bought earlier. Tommy accepted it carefully. Then, for the first time, he smiled. Jonathan's heart broke all over again. That evening, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He walked through the silent halls of his mansion. Grace's portrait still hung above the fireplace. He stopped in front of it. I met a little girl today. Silence. I don't know why, but I can't stop thinking about her. He imagined Emily sleeping beneath that freezing bridge, while he slept inside 20 empty bedrooms. It didn't seem right. Not even a little. The next morning, Jonathan canceled every meeting again. His board of directors couldn't believe it. Instead, he drove straight back to Franklin Street Bridge. Emily was sitting exactly where he'd left her. She looked surprised. You came back. Jonathan smiled. I said I would. She nodded. Most people don't. Jonathan sat beside her on the cold concrete. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, he asked, Emily, what do you want most in the world? She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, it wasn't toys, or money, or a mansion. She quietly whispered, I just want someone who comes back. Jonathan closed his eyes, because in that single sentence, a lonely billionaire realized the little, homeless girl had just described exactly what he had been searching for all these years. Neither of them knew it yet, but that simple conversation beneath an old bridge was about to change both of their lives forever. Jonathan Harrison couldn't stop thinking about Emily's words. I just want someone who comes back. The sentence echoed in his mind all night. The next morning, he stood in his kitchen, staring at an untouched cup of coffee. For years, he had lived by schedules, contracts, and board meetings. Every decision was measured in dollars and percentages. But this decision felt different. It wasn't about business. It was about a little girl who had stopped believing adults kept their promises. Jonathan picked up his phone. Cancel everything. His assistant, Melissa, sounded stunned. Everything, sir? Even the merger meeting? Everything. I have something more important to do. Within an hour, Jonathan was standing outside the Franklin Street Bridge with 2 large bags. Emily looked up in surprise. You really came back? I told you I would. She smiled, a real smile this time. Jonathan opened the bags. Inside were warm clothes. A winter coat, boots, gloves, a backpack, books, and enough groceries to feed several children. Emily's eyes filled with tears. These are for us? For you and Tommy. Tommy cautiously stepped forward. Jonathan handed him a brand new teddy bear. The little boy hugged it tightly without saying a word. Emily whispered, He hasn't smiled since his mom died. Tommy wrapped his tiny arms around the bear. Then, for only the second time since Jonathan met him, he smiled. That afternoon, Jonathan visited the city shelter. He met with social worker Sarah Mitchell, a woman who had spent 20 years helping homeless children. She opened Emily's file. I've been hoping someone like you would ask. Jonathan frowned. What do you mean? Sarah sighed. Emily isn't just another homeless child. She's extraordinary. Jonathan listened carefully. She shares her food, protects younger children, volunteers to clean, and every night she reads stories to kids who are scared. Jonathan blinked. Where did she learn that? Sarah smiled sadly. Her mother. Sarah handed Jonathan a worn notebook. We found this after her mother passed away. Inside were handwritten notes, recipes, poems, letters. One page caught Jonathan's attention. If anything ever happens to me, Emily, never let pain make your heart cruel. The world already has enough cruel people. Be the reason someone believes goodness still exists. Jonathan quietly closed the notebook. His eyes were wet. I want to adopt her. Sarah smiled. I thought you might. But Jonathan looked up. It won't be easy. She explained everything. Emily had no living legal guardian. Several records were missing. The court process could take months. Reporters would discover everything. Every decision would become national news. Jonathan didn't hesitate. I'll wait. If it takes a year, I'll wait. 3 days later, the news exploded. Billionaire Jonathan Harrison seeks to adopt homeless girl. Television crews surrounded Harrison Technologies. Social media erupted. Some people praised him. Others accused him of chasing publicity. Business commentators questioned his judgment. One investor even said, a billionaire has no business adopting a homeless child. Jonathan ignored them all. Unfortunately, not everyone did. Inside a luxury penthouse across town, a man watched the news with growing anger. His name was Victor Langston. He had once been Jonathan's closest business partner. Years earlier, Jonathan had exposed Victor's financial crimes, forcing him out of the company. Victor never forgave him. Now he smiled coldly. So, you finally found something you love. He switched off the television. That can be taken away. Meanwhile, Emily experienced something completely unfamiliar. A bedroom. She had been placed temporarily with a foster family approved by the court. The room was small, simple, safe. That first night, she refused to sleep on the bed. The foster mother found her lying on the floor. Honey, the bed is yours. Emily looked embarrassed. I've never had one. I didn't want to ruin it. The woman knelt beside her. You could never ruin this room. Emily quietly climbed into bed. For several minutes, she simply stared at the ceiling. It felt strange. No rain, no cold wind, no fear, only silence. Safe silence. Before falling asleep, she whispered, Thank you, Mom. The following weekend, Jonathan received permission to spend the afternoon with Emily. He took her to Navy Pier. Emily stared at Lake Michigan. It's so big. Jonathan laughed. It feels like the ocean sometimes. They rode the Ferris wheel together. Emily laughed so loudly that nearby families smiled at her happiness. Jonathan realized something. He hadn't laughed like that in nearly 30 years. Later, they shared ice cream. Emily looked around nervously. People are staring. They recognize you. Jonathan shrugged. They'll survive. She giggled. You always say that. I do? Yep. It's funny. As they walked, Emily noticed an elderly street musician playing a violin. People passed without stopping. Emily tugged Jonathan's sleeve. Can we listen? For 20 minutes, they stood quietly. When the song ended, Jonathan placed a $100 bill into the musician's case. The old man looked shocked. Emily whispered, My mom said music heals people. Jonathan nodded. She was right. On the drive home, Emily asked softly, Can I ask you something? Anything. Why me? Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, When I lost my wife and daughter, I thought my heart had died too. Emily listened quietly. But then I met a little girl under a bridge. A girl who had every reason to hate the world. But instead, she worried about a little boy. She thanked strangers. And she still believed kindness mattered. He smiled. You reminded me of someone. Who? My wife. Emily smiled. I think I would have liked her. Jonathan looked out the windshield. I think she would have loved you. Weeks passed. The adoption hearing drew closer. Everything seemed hopeful. Until one rainy evening, Sarah Mitchell called Jonathan. Her voice trembled. Someone filed an anonymous complaint. Jonathan's stomach dropped. What kind of complaint? They're claiming you're adopting Emily for publicity. That your company plans to use her in advertisements. Jonathan stood silently. That's ridiculous. I know, but the court has to investigate. The next morning, reporters camped outside Jonathan's mansion. Microphones followed him everywhere. Mr. Harrison, is this adoption a publicity stunt? Are you buying public sympathy? Jonathan stopped walking. He looked directly into the cameras. I don't care what people believe about me, but if anyone hurts that little girl to attack me, they'll answer to me. For the first time in years, the billionaire looked angry. Not for himself, for his daughter. That evening, Emily overheard two foster children talking. They say he's only pretending. He's going to leave her. Emily quietly walked back into her room. She sat on the bed, then slowly opened her mother's notebook. Inside was the old photograph. Her mother smiling, holding her hand. Emily whispered through tears, What if they're right? What if everyone leaves? The next afternoon, Jonathan visited. He immediately noticed something was wrong. You've been crying. Emily forced a smile. I'm okay. Jonathan sat beside her. No, you aren't. She looked at him with frightened eyes. Are you going to stop wanting me? The question shattered him. He gently took her hand. Emily, look at me. She did. I lost the people I loved once. I know exactly what it feels like when someone doesn't come back. His voice cracked. So hear me carefully. I am not leaving. Not because of reporters. Not because of money. Not because of anything. I choose you. Emily couldn't hold back anymore. She threw her arms around him and cried harder than she ever had. Jonathan hugged her like the daughter he had already accepted in his heart. For the first time since her mother died, Emily believed someone meant it. But neither of them knew. Across the city, Victor Langston was already setting the next part of his plan into motion. And it wouldn't just threaten the adoption, it would put Jonathan's entire legacy and Emily's future in danger. 3 weeks before the adoption hearing, Jonathan Harrison's world began to unravel. It started with a single envelope. No return address. No stamp. Just his name written in black ink. Inside was a photocopy of an old newspaper article. The headline read, Harrison Technologies under investigation after former employee's death. Jonathan's face turned pale. It was a story from nearly 30 years earlier. A tragic accident at one of his company's construction sites had claimed the life of a young engineer. The investigation had cleared Harrison Technologies of wrongdoing, but Jonathan had never forgotten the man's family. Written across the article in red marker were 6 chilling words. You don't deserve to be a father. Jonathan folded the paper slowly. He knew exactly who was behind it. Victor Langston. That afternoon, Sarah Mitchell rushed into Jonathan's office. There's another problem. Jonathan looked up. The judge has received anonymous documents questioning your character. What documents? Old lawsuits. False accusations. Articles taken completely out of context. Jonathan sighed. Victor. Sarah nodded. He wants the court to think you're emotionally unfit. Jonathan stared out the window. I expected him to come after me. I just hoped he wouldn't involve Emily. Meanwhile, Emily was settling into her foster home. She had started attending a nearby elementary school. At first, she kept to herself. She worried that if people discovered she had once lived under a bridge, they would laugh at her. One afternoon during recess, a classmate named Lily noticed Emily sitting alone. Want to play? Emily smiled nervously. I don't really know how. Lily laughed. You don't have to know. You just have to come. For the first time in years, Emily played tag. She laughed until she couldn't breathe. When the bell rang, she realized something wonderful. For 20 whole minutes, she had forgotten she was afraid. That evening, Jonathan picked her up for dinner. As they drove through Chicago, Emily looked out the window. So many people. So many lights. Jonathan smiled. The city looks different when you're not trying to survive it. Emily nodded quietly. It feels kinder. They stopped at a small bookstore. Emily wandered through the children's section, running her fingers across the shelves. Jonathan noticed she kept picking up books and then putting them back. Why don't you choose one? They cost money. I know. You don't have to buy me things. Jonathan smiled. I know. I want to. Emily finally chose a copy of Charlotte's Web. My mom always wanted to read this with me. Jonathan bought the book without another word. That night, sitting in the library of his mansion, he began reading aloud. Emily curled up on the sofa, listening. Halfway through the first chapter, she fell asleep. Jonathan gently placed a blanket over her. For a long moment, he simply watched her sleeping peacefully. The enormous house no longer felt empty. It finally sounded like home. The peace didn't last. 2 days later, every major news channel aired the same headline. Questions raised about Billionaire's adoption. Reporters repeated Victor's accusations. Talk shows debated whether wealthy people should be allowed to adopt children. Emily accidentally heard the television while eating breakfast. She quietly turned it off. The foster mother found her sitting alone. Honey? Emily asked in a trembling voice. If they don't let him adopt me, will I have to leave again? The woman hugged her tightly. We're going to hope for the best. But even she couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled every seat. Television cameras waited outside. Jonathan wore a simple navy suit. Emily held his hand tightly. Are you scared? He asked. She nodded. A little. He squeezed her hand gently. So am I. She looked surprised. Really? He smiled. Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you keep going anyway. Emily smiled. Then let's be brave. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered the courtroom. Everyone stood. The hearing began. Victor's lawyer presented the anonymous accusations. He questioned Jonathan's age, his demanding career, his wealth, even his ability to relate to a child. Jonathan answered every question calmly. Then came the hardest one. Mr. Harrison, why adopt now? The courtroom became silent. Jonathan looked toward Emily. When my wife died, I convinced myself I had nothing left to give. So I built buildings. I built companies. I built a fortune. But I never built another family. His voice softened. Then one rainy morning, I met a little girl sitting under a bridge. She had nothing. And somehow, she still believed kindness mattered. I didn't rescue Emily. Emily rescued me. Not a sound could be heard. Even several reporters lowered their cameras. Then the judge surprised everyone. Emily Carter, would you like to say anything? Sarah looked nervous. Emily slowly walked to the front of the courtroom. She could barely reach the microphone. Her hands trembled. She looked at the crowded room. Then at Jonathan. Finally, she spoke. When you don't have a home, you stop wishing for toys. You stop wishing for birthdays. You stop wishing for Christmas. The courtroom listened in complete silence. You only wish that someone chooses you. Emily wiped away a tear. Mr. Harrison chose me, not because I'm perfect, not because I'm special. He chose me because he said every child deserves someone who comes back. She looked directly at the judge. If you don't let him be my dad, I'll still love him, because he already taught me what love looks like. Several people in the courtroom began crying. Even the court reporter paused to wipe away tears. Judge Brooks announced a short recess before making her decision. Jonathan and Emily waited in a quiet hallway. Emily looked up at him. "I'm sorry if I messed it up." Jonathan knelt beside her. "You were perfect." "No, you were brave." At that very moment, across the street, Victor Langston smiled as he watched the courthouse through tinted windows. His assistant asked, "What if the judge approves the adoption?" Victor's smile widened. "She won't get the chance." He pulled another envelope from his briefcase. Inside was evidence he had secretly fabricated, documents designed to frame Jonathan for financial misconduct. If released, they wouldn't just stop the adoption. They could destroy Harrison Technologies and send Jonathan to prison. Victor looked toward the courthouse. "Let's see how much a father's love is worth." Back inside, the judge returned to the bench. The courtroom rose once again. She opened the case file. Everyone held their breath. Then, just as she was about to announce her decision, the courtroom doors burst open. A federal investigator stepped inside carrying a sealed folder. "Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this court needs to see these documents immediately." Jonathan's heart sank. Victor smiled from outside the courthouse, and Emily felt Jonathan's hand tighten around hers. Whatever was inside that folder, it had the power to change all of their lives. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Every eye turned toward the federal investigator standing at the entrance, holding a thick sealed folder. Judge Eleanor Brooks frowned, approached the bench. The investigator walked forward and handed her the documents. "This information was delivered to our office anonymously early this morning. Because it concerns Mr. Harrison, we believed the court should review it immediately." Jonathan remained calm, but inside his heart pounded. Emily tightened her grip on his hand. She whispered, "What's happening?" Jonathan smiled gently. "I don't know yet, but whatever happens, I'm right here." The judge opened the folder. She read silently for several minutes. The courtroom was so quiet that the ticking of the old wall clock echoed through the room. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Harrison, these documents accuse you of hiding millions of dollars through offshore accounts." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Reporters immediately began scribbling notes. Jonathan calmly answered, "Those accusations are false." The judge nodded. "I understand, but the court must examine the evidence." Victor Langston sat in the back row wearing dark sunglasses. A smile slowly spread across his face. Everything was happening exactly as he had planned. If Jonathan lost the adoption, he would lose everything else soon afterward. Sarah Mitchell stood up. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge nodded. Sarah said firmly, "I have worked with vulnerable children for over 20 years. I have seen people pretend to care. I have seen people exploit children. Jonathan Harrison is not one of them. He has never asked for publicity. He has never used Emily for attention. He has simply shown up every single day." The courtroom listened quietly. Then the judge looked toward Jonathan. "Do you have anything further to say?" Jonathan stood. "I built my company honestly. I've made mistakes in life. I've worked too much. I've spent years hiding from grief. But I have never committed the crimes described in those papers." He paused. "If someone wishes to punish me, they're free to try. But please," he looked toward Emily, "don't punish a little girl who has already lost everything." Emily could no longer hold back her tears. She slowly walked toward the judge. "May I say something?" The judge smiled kindly. "You may." Emily took a deep breath. "I don't know anything about money. I don't understand companies. But I know people." She looked around the courtroom. "When I lived under the bridge, thousands of people walked past me. They saw me, but they kept walking." She turned toward Jonathan. "He didn't. He bought me breakfast. He bought Tommy a teddy bear. He read me stories. He remembered my favorite flower. No one told him to. No cameras were there. He did it because he's kind." The room became silent once again. If that's the kind of person who isn't allowed to be a dad, then I don't understand grown-ups. Several jurors wiped tears from their eyes. Even one of the reporters quietly lowered his camera. The judge ordered a 1-hour recess while investigators reviewed the documents. Outside the courthouse, news crews crowded around Jonathan. "Mr. Harrison, did you hide money overseas? Will the adoption be canceled?" Jonathan ignored every question. His only concern was Emily. He found her sitting alone on a courthouse bench. She was staring at the ground. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Emily hesitated. If they say I can't live with you, I'll be okay." Jonathan's heart broke. She continued softly, "I've been alone before. You don't have to fight anymore because of me." Jonathan knelt in front of her. "No, I'm fighting because you're my family. Families don't quit on each other." Emily threw her arms around him. "I've never had a dad before." Jonathan hugged her tightly. "And I've never had a daughter." Across the street, Victor watched them from inside his car. His assistant frowned. "They still seem close." Victor's expression darkened. "Then we haven't hurt them enough." Just then his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Victor answered impatiently. "What?" A deep voice replied. "You made a mistake." Victor's smile disappeared. "What are you talking about?" "The documents. You forged them. And someone knows." The line went dead. For the first time that day, Victor looked afraid. Back inside the courthouse, the recess ended. The judge returned with a serious expression. She addressed the courtroom. "The federal investigators have completed an initial review." Everyone held their breath. The documents submitted anonymously contain multiple inconsistencies. She looked directly at Jonathan. "At this time, there is no evidence that Mr. Harrison committed financial fraud." The courtroom erupted with relieved whispers. Victor's face turned white. The judge continued. "In fact, our investigators now believe these documents may themselves be fraudulent." The room fell silent again. She turned toward the federal investigator. "I am ordering a criminal investigation into whoever submitted this material." Victor slowly stood from his seat. He quietly slipped toward the exit before anyone noticed. "But one person did." "Emily," she whispered. "Dad!" Jonathan smiled when he heard the word. It was the first time she had ever called him that. Emily pointed toward Victor. "That man. I've seen him before." Jonathan looked carefully. "Where?" Emily frowned. "He was under the bridge. He asked me strange questions about you." Jonathan's expression changed instantly. Before anyone could stop him, Victor rushed out of the courthouse. Federal agents noticed. "Stop!" Victor broke into a run. News cameras captured everything live. People on the courthouse steps watched in shock as this once powerful businessman tried to escape. After a short chase, federal agents tackled him. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Reporters rushed forward. Victor shouted, "You think you've won? This isn't over!" Jonathan simply held Emily's hand. He said nothing. He didn't need to. An hour later, Judge Brooks returned one final time. She smiled warmly. "Emily Carter, for most of your life, you've waited for someone to choose you." She looked at Jonathan. "And Jonathan Harrison, you've spent decades believing your family was gone forever." She closed the file. "This court finds that the adoption is in the best interest of the child. I am honored to approve the adoption." For one breathtaking moment, no one moved. Emily looked at Jonathan. "Does that mean—" He couldn't even speak. He simply nodded. Emily burst into tears and hugged him with all her strength. "I have a dad." Jonathan held her close, tears streaming down his face. "And I have a daughter." The entire courtroom stood and applauded. Even seasoned reporters admitted later that it was the most emotional adoption they had ever witnessed. That evening, Jonathan and Emily drove home together. As they pulled into the long driveway of the Harrison estate, Emily looked at the enormous house. Then she smiled. "It doesn't look so big anymore." Jonathan laughed softly. "No?" She shook her head. "It finally looks like a home." Jonathan looked at the glowing windows. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the mansion no longer echoed with loneliness. It echoed with hope. Neither of them realized this was only the beginning of their journey together. The greatest joys and the greatest heartbreak still lay ahead. The first morning Emily woke up as Emily Harrison. She didn't realize her life had already changed forever. She opened her eyes slowly. The room was warm. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. For a moment, panic filled her chest. She sat upright, wondering where she was. Then she remembered. The courtroom. The judge. Jonathan's tearful smile. "I have a dad." A huge smile spread across her face. She jumped out of bed and ran downstairs. Jonathan was standing in the kitchen wearing an apron. Emily stopped in the doorway. "You cook?" Jonathan laughed. "I'm trying." The smoke detector answered before Emily could. "Beep! Beep! Beep!" Emily burst into laughter. Jonathan looked at the burned pancakes and sighed. "I think breakfast has officially surrendered." Still laughing, Emily rolled up her sleeves. "My mom taught me." Together they made fresh pancakes. Jonathan followed every instruction carefully. When breakfast was finally ready, Emily took one bite. "They're perfect." Jonathan grinned. "They're edible." That's an improvement. For the first time in decades, laughter echoed through the Harrison mansion. The house seemed to come alive. The employees noticed the change almost immediately. Mrs. Ramirez, the longtime housekeeper, smiled as she watched Emily helping set the table. "I've worked here for 28 years, she whispered to the gardener. "I've never heard Mr. Harrison laugh this much." The gardener nodded. "It's like someone turned the lights back on." Emily treated every employee with kindness. She learned everyone's names. She thanked the cooks after every meal. She helped the gardeners water flowers. She even wrote birthday cards for the security guards. One afternoon, Jonathan asked, "Why do you always thank everyone?" Emily shrugged. "When people feel invisible, they start believing they don't matter." "I know what that feels like." Jonathan quietly looked away. Even after everything she had survived, she still noticed other people's hearts before her own. Months passed. Emily flourished. She loved school. She joined the library club. She made friends. Her grades became some of the highest in her class. But what amazed Jonathan most wasn't her intelligence. It was her compassion. Every Friday after school, Emily packed sandwiches. Not for herself. For the homeless people still living beneath Franklin Street Bridge. One cold December afternoon, Jonathan found her filling bags with blankets. "What are these for?" Emily smiled. "Christmas." He looked confused. She answered softly, "I remember what it feels like to be cold. You never forget." Jonathan didn't say another word. Instead, he grabbed another box. "Then we'd better pack more." That Christmas Eve, father and daughter drove through downtown Chicago in one of Jonathan's SUVs. The back was filled with coats, food, gloves, and toys. Emily personally handed each gift to families living on the streets. One elderly man began crying. "No one remembers us." Emily hugged him. "We remember." Jonathan watched quietly. He realized something. He had donated millions of dollars over the years. But standing beside Emily, he finally understood the difference between giving money and giving hope. The next morning, Emily ran downstairs carrying a wrapped present. "Dad!" Jonathan smiled. "You got me something?" Emily nodded excitedly. He carefully opened the package. Inside was a simple wooden picture frame. It held a photo from the day of their adoption. Across the bottom, Emily had written by hand, "Thank you for coming back." Jonathan couldn't speak. He simply hugged her. Best Christmas present he had ever received. Years passed. Emily grew from a frightened little girl into a confident young woman. At 14, she organized a school fundraiser for homeless shelters. At 16, she started a nonprofit called Second Chance Kids, helping homeless children receive school supplies, tutoring, and warm meals. By 18, thousands of children across Illinois had received help through her foundation. Reporters often asked why she worked so hard. Emily always gave the same answer. "Because someone once gave me a second chance." Jonathan watched with pride. One evening, they sat on the porch overlooking Lake Michigan. "I thought I was saving you," he admitted. Emily smiled. "You did." He shook his head. "No, you saved me first." Life seemed perfect. Until one spring morning, Jonathan canceled breakfast. Emily immediately knew something was wrong. Her father never missed breakfast. She found him sitting alone in his study. Medical papers covered the desk. "Dad?" He quickly closed the folder. "I'm fine." Emily had inherited one of Jonathan's habits. She knew when someone was pretending. She quietly picked up the papers after he left the room. Her hands began to shake. Diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. She felt as if the floor disappeared beneath her feet. That evening, Jonathan finally told her the truth. "The doctors think treatment can help." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to get better." He smiled gently. "I'll do everything I can." She grabbed his hand. "Promise." "I promise." The next several months became the hardest of their lives. Chemotherapy, hospital visits, long nights. Some mornings, Jonathan was too weak to stand. Emily attended college during the day and spent every evening at the hospital. She read books to him, just as he had once read to her. One night, Jonathan whispered, "Remember Charlotte's Web?" Emily smiled through tears. "You never finished the last chapter." He laughed weakly. "I kept falling asleep." "So did I." They laughed together, even in the hospital. Despite the pain, Jonathan insisted on attending every fundraiser Emily organized. When she gave speeches, he sat proudly in the front row. People often noticed the elderly billionaire wiping tears from his eyes. One reporter asked him why. Jonathan answered, "Because that's my daughter. And she's become a better human being than I ever dreamed." As the illness progressed, Jonathan began putting his affairs in order. One afternoon, he called his attorney. "I need to update my will." Emily overheard and walked away quietly. She didn't want to hear. Money meant nothing to her. She only wanted more time. Several weeks later, Jonathan handed Emily a sealed envelope. "Don't open this." She frowned. "When should I?" He smiled sadly. "When I'm gone." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "I don't want that day to come." Jonathan gently wiped away one of her tears. "Neither do I. But when it does, you'll understand." Emily hugged him tightly. She had no idea that inside the envelope was one final request. A request so unexpected. It would leave an entire funeral speechless, and it would reveal the greatest secret Jonathan Harrison had carried in his heart. Since the day he found a little girl beneath a bridge, the autumn leaves drifted across the gardens of the Harrison estate. Jonathan Harrison stood at the window of his study, watching them fall one by one. Years ago, he would have seen only another season passing. Now he understood how precious every single day truly was. Behind him, Emily entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Thought you might like this." Jonathan smiled. "You still remember?" Emily laughed softly. "You always put too many marshmallows in yours." "I have a sweet tooth." "You definitely do." For a few minutes, they simply stood together, watching the wind move through the trees. Neither wanted to speak about what both of them already knew. Jonathan's cancer was getting worse. His treatments became less frequent. Not because he had given up, but because the doctors had gently explained there was little more they could do. Emily never stopped believing. She researched clinical trials. She spoke with specialists across the country. She refused to lose hope. One evening, she burst into Jonathan's room with a folder full of information. "Dad! I found another treatment in Boston." Jonathan smiled warmly. "You've been working too hard. It could help." "It might. So let's go." Jonathan reached for her hand. "Emily." She looked at him. "My greatest miracle already happened." "You?" She shook her head immediately. "No, don't say things like that. We're going to beat this." Jonathan gently squeezed her hand. "I hope you're right." Even as his strength faded, Jonathan continued supporting Emily's charity. One Saturday, they visited a new community center funded by Second Chance Kids. The building stood only a few blocks from the bridge where they had first met. Children laughed in classrooms. Families shared warm meals. Volunteers handed out winter coats. Emily watched a little girl reading quietly in the corner. She smiled. "She reminds me of myself." Jonathan nodded. "Except now. She has somewhere safe to go." Emily looked around the center. "You built this." Jonathan shook his head. "No, you inspired it." That afternoon, an elderly homeless man recognized Jonathan. Mr. Harrison? Jonathan walked over. The man smiled. You probably don't remember me, but years ago, you gave me a winter coat. Jonathan searched his memory. I remember your eyes. The man laughed. I still wear that coat every winter. Emily smiled. Kindness lasts longer than people think. The old man nodded. It saved my life. Jonathan quietly looked at Emily. She had taught him that the smallest act of compassion could echo for decades. As winter approached, Jonathan grew weaker. Walking across the house became exhausting. Emily moved many of her charity meetings into the mansion, so she could stay close to him. Some evenings they sat in the library, saying very little. Silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. One snowy night, Jonathan pointed toward the bookshelf. Bring me Charlotte's Web. Emily smiled through tears. She found the worn copy. The pages were faded from years of reading. Jonathan handed it back. This time, you read to me. Emily opened the book. Her voice trembled at first, but soon the familiar words filled the room. When she reached the final chapter, she looked up. Jonathan had tears in his eyes. You finished it? So did you. They both smiled. A few days before Christmas, Jonathan asked Emily to help him decorate the tree. She noticed he became tired after hanging only a few ornaments. Without saying anything, she quietly finished while he watched. This house used to be so quiet, he whispered. Emily looked over. I remember. I thought I had everything. He shook his head. I had nothing. You gave me family again. Emily walked over and hugged him. You gave me one first. Christmas morning arrived. Snow covered the grounds like a white blanket. Jonathan handed Emily a small wrapped box. Inside was a silver key. She looked confused. What does it open? Jonathan smiled. The old oak door in the west wing. I've never opened it. I know. I was saving it. Together, they walked slowly through the mansion until they reached the old wooden door. Jonathan unlocked it. Inside was a beautiful room. The walls were covered with photographs. Pictures of Grace. Pictures of Jonathan. Pictures of Emily from the day they met until now. There were school awards, birthday cards, drawings, newspaper clippings about her charity. In the center stood a wooden plaque. It read, Family is built by love, not by blood. Emily covered her mouth. You made this? Jonathan nodded. I wanted you to know you've never been my adopted daughter. You've always been my daughter. Emily hugged him as tightly as she could. Neither noticed the snow falling outside the windows. Later that night, Jonathan called his attorney, his doctor, and Sarah Mitchell to the mansion. Emily waited upstairs. She didn't know why they had come. When the meeting ended, Jonathan slowly climbed the stairs. He knocked gently on Emily's bedroom door. Can we talk? She nodded. They sat together by the fireplace. Jonathan handed her another envelope. This is different from the first one. Emily frowned. I don't want envelopes. I want you. Jonathan smiled sadly. I know, but someday, you'll need these. She reluctantly accepted it. What's inside? My final wish. She looked away. I can't. You don't have to. Not yet. Jonathan took a long breath. Emily, when I die. She immediately interrupted. Please stop. He gently continued. I don't want a grand funeral. I don't want speeches about business. I don't want people talking about my wealth. She looked at him through tears. What do you want? He smiled. I want you to tell them the truth. What truth? The story of a little girl beneath a bridge. Emily began crying. I won't be able to. Yes, you will. Because you're stronger than you think. He gently placed his hand over hers. And after you finish, I want you to do one more thing. Emily nodded silently. Jonathan whispered the request into her ear. Her eyes widened in complete shock. She couldn't believe what he was asking. Dad, are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She hugged him tightly. I promise. Jonathan closed his eyes. I know you will. 3 weeks later, the mansion was unusually quiet. Doctors came and went. Family friends filled the halls. Emily rarely left Jonathan's side. Late one evening, he opened his eyes and smiled weakly. Emily? I'm here. Always, he whispered. Thank you for giving an old man another chance to be a father. Emily leaned close. No, thank you for coming back. Jonathan smiled one last time. Then he peacefully closed his eyes. Outside, snow began to fall over Chicago. Inside the Harrison mansion, a daughter held her father's hand until sunrise, and in her pocket, she carried two unopened envelopes. One contained a letter, the other contained a promise that would soon leave hundreds of mourners completely speechless. The news spread across America within hours. Billionaire philanthropist Jonathan Harrison dies at 82 after a courageous battle with cancer. Television networks interrupted their regular programming. Business leaders released statements praising his achievements. Politicians called him one of the nation's greatest entrepreneurs. Newspapers printed headlines about the billions he had earned. But none of those headlines mentioned the title Jonathan treasured most: Dad. 3 days later, thousands gathered at Chicago's largest cathedral. The line stretched around the block. Employees who had worked for Jonathan for decades stood beside homeless, families he had quietly helped, teachers, doctors, construction workers, former veterans, children from Emily's foundation. Many had never met one another. Yet every one of them had a story about Jonathan's kindness. Inside the cathedral, the front pew was reserved for Emily. She wore a simple black dress. Around her neck hung the small silver key Jonathan had given her on Christmas morning. In her hands were the two sealed envelopes. She hadn't opened either one. Not yet. Sarah Mitchell quietly sat beside her. You don't have to be strong every second. Emily nodded. I know. But I made him a promise. The service began. One by one, distinguished guests approached the podium. A senator praised Jonathan's leadership. The CEO of Harrison Technologies spoke about innovation. A university president thanked him for his scholarships. Every speech was respectful. Every speech was sincere. But Emily couldn't help thinking, they were describing the billionaire, not the man who burned pancakes, not the father who read Charlotte's Web until they both fell asleep, not the man who always remembered extra marshmallows and hot chocolate. Finally, the pastor stepped forward. There is one final speaker. He smiled gently toward Emily. His daughter. The entire cathedral became silent. Emily slowly walked to the podium. Her hands trembled. She looked at the sea of faces before her. Then she looked at her father's casket. She took a deep breath. When I was 9 years old, I lived under Franklin Street Bridge. A ripple of surprise spread through the audience. I was cold. I was hungry. And I believed the world had forgotten me. She paused. Thousands of people walked past me. Most never looked down. But one man stopped. She smiled through tears. He didn't ask where I'd failed. He didn't ask why I was homeless. He simply asked, when was the last time you ate? Soft sobs echoed through the cathedral. Emily continued. That breakfast changed my life. Not because of the pancakes. Everyone smiled gently. But because someone finally saw me. She looked toward the business executives seated in the front rows. You knew him as a billionaire? I knew him as the man who tucked a blanket around me when I fell asleep reading. You knew him as a visionary. I knew him as the dad who burned breakfast almost every Saturday. Gentle laughter mixed with tears. You knew his fortune. I knew his heart. Emily reached into her purse. She removed the first envelope. Written across the front were the words, For Emily, open after I'm gone. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. She unfolded it carefully. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then I've finally kept the one promise I never wanted to keep. I had to leave. But before grief convinces you that you're alone, remember something. The greatest day of my life wasn't the day I became a billionaire. It wasn't the day my company went public. It wasn't the day my name appeared on magazine covers. The greatest day of my life was the rainy morning I met a little girl beneath a bridge. You believed I rescued you. The truth is, you rescued me. You gave a lonely old man a reason to laugh again. You filled an empty house with life. You taught me that family is chosen through love. If people remember me, I hope they don't remember my money. I hope they remember that every child deserves someone who comes back. Thank you for calling me Dad. Love always, Dad. By the time Emily finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the cathedral. Even seasoned journalists quietly wiped away tears. Emily folded the letter carefully. Then she looked toward Jonathan's casket. I love you too, Dad. The room was completely silent. Just then, Jonathan's attorney, Daniel Brooks, stood. There is one final instruction Mr. Harrison requested. He nodded toward Emily. It is entirely her choice. Emily reached for the second envelope. Her heart raced. This one contained Jonathan's final wish. She slowly opened it. Inside was a single page. She read it silently. Then she froze. Her eyes widened. Tears streamed down her face. Sarah whispered, "What is it?" Emily looked toward the congregation, then toward the cathedral doors. Finally, she smiled through her tears. He really meant it. Without another word, she folded the letter, walked away from the podium, and headed toward the main entrance of the cathedral. The congregation watched in complete confusion. Business leaders exchanged puzzled glances. Reporters hurried after her. No one understood what she was about to do. But within the next few minutes, Jonathan. Harrison's final wish would leave every person at his funeral in absolute shock. The entire cathedral watched in confusion as Emily walked away from the podium. No one spoke. No one understood. Business leaders exchanged puzzled looks. Television cameras followed her every step. She reached the massive wooden doors and slowly opened them. Outside, more than 200 homeless men, women, and children stood quietly behind police barriers. Many had come simply to say goodbye to the man who had secretly helped them for years. Most believed they weren't welcome inside. Emily smiled through her tears. Then she remembered the words Jonathan had written in his second letter. She unfolded it and read aloud. If my funeral is filled only with powerful people, then it isn't really my funeral. Open the doors. Invite every homeless person outside to sit in the front rows. They are my honored guests. Tell everyone that before I became a billionaire, I was simply another human being. And remind them that no one's value is measured by the money in their pocket. It's measured by the love in their heart. Silence. Complete silence. Then Emily looked toward the people waiting outside. With tears streaming down her face, she smiled. Please, my dad saved a seat for you. No one moved. An elderly homeless woman whispered, Us? Emily nodded. Yes. Especially you. The woman stepped forward slowly. Then another person. Then another. Families entered the cathedral wearing worn coats and old shoes. Business executives immediately stood up. Without being asked, they offered their seats. Within minutes, the front rows were filled with people who, only hours earlier, believed they would never be allowed inside. The pastor quietly wiped away tears. I've never witnessed anything like this. One little boy hesitated near Jonathan's casket. Emily recognized him instantly. Tommy? The little boy she had protected under the bridge was no longer 7 years old. He was a young man. He smiled shyly. I wanted to say thank you. Emily hugged him tightly. You found me. Tommy nodded. I found a family too. I was adopted 2 years after you. Emily cried even harder. Jonathan had changed more than one life. After everyone was seated, Jonathan's attorney returned to the podium. There is one more surprise. He smiled at Emily. Mr. Harrison prepared a final video message. The lights dimmed. A large screen lowered behind the altar. Jonathan appeared on the screen. He looked older than everyone remembered. But his smile was exactly the same. Hello. If you're watching this, I've finally run out of time. Soft laughter echoed through the room. Jonathan continued. I've spent most of my life being introduced as a billionaire. But that's not how I'd like to be remembered. He looked directly into the camera. I'd rather be remembered as Emily's dad. Emily covered her mouth, unable to stop crying. Jonathan smiled. If you've attended my funeral because of my business, thank you. But before you leave, I have one request. He paused. Find someone the world has forgotten. Listen to them. Help them. Believe in them. Because one act of kindness can change generations. He looked down for a moment before continuing. When I met Emily, I thought I was giving a hungry little girl breakfast. I didn't realize she was giving me my life back. The screen slowly faded to black. There wasn't a single dry eye in the cathedral. Then Attorney Brooks opened Jonathan's final legal document. Mr. Harrison's last will contains one extraordinary instruction. Everyone listened carefully. After providing for his family and employees, Jonathan Harrison has donated nearly 90% of his fortune to establish the Jonathan and Emily Harrison Foundation. The room gasped. The foundation's mission is simple. No child in America should ever sleep on the street because no one cared enough to help. The audience erupted into applause. Emily shook her head in disbelief. Her father had planned everything. Even after his death, he was still changing lives. Weeks later, volunteers across the country began opening the first Harrison Hope Centers. Each center offered safe beds for homeless children, free meals, medical care, counseling, education, job assistance for struggling parents. Above every entrance hung the same simple words: someone will always come back. It became the foundation's promise. Months passed. Emily worked tirelessly to honor her father's dream. She visited every center personally. She learned children's names. She listened to their stories. One snowy afternoon, she noticed a frightened little girl sitting alone in the corner of a shelter. The child hugged an old backpack. Emily slowly walked over. "Hi." The little girl looked up nervously. "What's your name?" "Lily." Emily smiled. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" The little girl nodded. As they sat together, Emily couldn't help but remember another rainy day. Another lonely child. Another stranger who had stopped instead of walking away. Before leaving, Emily gently placed Jonathan's favorite wool scarf around Lily's shoulders. "You'll need this." "What about you?" Lily asked. Emily smiled. "I'll be okay." The exact words Jonathan had once said to her. In that moment, Emily realized something beautiful. Kindness doesn't end with one person. It keeps traveling from heart to heart. Every year on Jonathan's birthday, Emily returned to Franklin Street Bridge. She always carried 2 bouquets of white lilies, one for her mother, one for her father. She sat quietly beneath the bridge for a while, remembering the little girl she used to be. One year, a reporter found her there. "Miss Harrison," he asked, "what do you think your father would say if he could see everything you've built?" Emily smiled toward the sky. "He wouldn't ask how many buildings we own. He wouldn't ask how much money the foundation has. He'd ask only one question." The reporter waited. Emily looked toward children laughing outside the nearby Harrison Hope Center. Then she smiled. He'd ask, when was the last time they ate? Years later, a bronze statue was placed outside the first Harrison Hope Center. It didn't show Jonathan standing alone. It showed a billionaire sitting on a sidewalk beside a little girl. Between them rested a simple paper bag holding breakfast. At the base of the statue were the words that defined both of their lives. "The greatest wealth is giving someone hope when they have none." People from around the country visited the memorial. Many left flowers. Others left handwritten notes. Some simply sat quietly. Every one of them left believing that kindness could still change the world. And perhaps that was Jonathan Harrison's greatest legacy of all. Not the fortune he built, not the company he created, but the daughter he loved, and the love she continued to share with the world. The end. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who believes in the power of kindness, and leave a comment telling us what part of Jonathan and Emily's journey moved you the most. Your support helps us continue sharing heartfelt stories that inspire hope.